Look, again, Graham, thanks for inviting us in. And again, this is quite a new way of doing it. So if there is things you want to ask as we go through, or if you don't quite hear it and want it repeated, as Graham said, just use that chat button as we go through it. But look, I thought I'd start with that quote there. And I think, golf is a game that's played in a 5-inch course, the distance between your ears. And I think that's very relevant for bowls too. It is a game that we have to be able to manage those first bowls to the last bowls, and there is lots of pressure around it. So I thought that was a quite nice quote for us to start off with. So what I thought I'd do today, Graham sent me through those questions. We're going to look to go through those questions and then use PB, Shannon, and Joe to kind of get some feedback from them around some practical stuff and what they do. And I'm hoping what you're going to see around the mental skills, sports psychology is everyone does it slightly differently. There's not one size fits all, and I suppose that's the key thing of you guys as coaches, or even if you're playing still, it's finding something that works for you. And the key thing around finding something that works is making sure it's simple around it. So what we're going to start off with is go through those questions. But I thought first and foremost, and Graham's touched on this, but a massive thank you for obviously giving up a Sunday to go through this, but also coaching. I'm really lucky. I go across lots of different sports and lots of different athletes. And the key ingredient to any successful athlete, and that's whether it's a club player in any sport or international, is their coaches and the relationship coaches make. So you guys have a massive ability to really ensure people enjoy the game, obviously learn from the game and grow. So again, a huge thank you for giving your time up for today, and obviously the future work you guys will be doing with our athletes moving forward. So look, this is what we're going to kind of try and go through. Whether we get through all of it, I don't know. We've got an hour, but it's around going through your questions, looking at the relationship stuff around coach, which is crucial, looking at simple goals, why they're important, looking at being deliberate around our training, and potentially if we get chance, we should have a chance to look at it as around our processes to perform at the top level, and that's whether it's at your club rink or overseas. So one of the first questions that was asked is, why is sports psychology and mental skills important? And I suppose it is one that some coaches and players do not think it's important around it. So I suppose as a coach, one of the first challenges I give you is maybe you've got to start reflecting on, is it something you want to invest time in as a coach and as a player? And I'll chuck it through to Shannon and Joe in a second around their thoughts around this question. But I suppose the easiest way for me to answer that for you guys is, if you've got a bit of paper in front of you, maybe just write down 5 things that impact on your performance as a bowler. And just have a thing, jot down 5 things. Those could be positive things. They could be negative things around. But if you think about what are 5 key things that impact on your performance as a bowler, if you just want to jot those down as I talk, and we can reflect on it. Because when we often do that process, and often I do it if we had all of you in front of us in the room, we'd often fill the board with all these different things that impact on our ability to perform on the bowls green. And what we've learned over time is most of those impacts are mental, not physical. It's concentration, it's focus, it's mindset, it's confidence, it's self-belief. All those things are the key things that allow us to actually perform at whatever level we want to play at. And what we know is physically we don't change much during the week. What shifts, or even the day, what shifts most is our mindset. And our ability to manage it on a consistent basis. So, Joe and Shan, for you guys, really quickly, what do you think for you? Why is it important for you, sports psychology and mental skills? Joe, I'll put you in the hot spot first. What would come out for you?
Thanks very much, Connie. Yep, good on you. Yeah, look, I think you nutted it. Really, it's all about keeping the game simple, and I think what you've done to our group of blackjacks and the wider group is just simplify things and just pretty much say that what we're feeling is not uncommon. I think as sports people, as people, your mind takes over and you start worrying about things that really don't have a big impact on things. And I think it's just the simplifying the whole headspace and like you say, physically, we're all, you should be in pretty good shape, but it's the mental side of things that can really stuff up your game, because I think basically thinking too much is a problem, and that's what we all do. And if we can just stop thinking so much, go back to basics and be in the here and in the now rather than too far down the track, I think, that's the huge thing, that sports psych can play a big part in your game.
Perfect. Thank you. Shan, your thoughts?
Brilliant. Pretty much exactly what what Joe said, Quinny. I think even from a grassroots level, I think what most people do is they only see or practice the physical side of bowls. And if you were to, as you said earlier, touched on before, if you were to actually jot down and break down the game and its components, you'll probably find that over 90% of it is mental. So, and it's just an area that a lot of people are not used to applying themselves in the sport. And it's something that since you've come on board with us and the New Zealand side is for us to put sort of a bit of time and effort into those areas, and the improvement that it's had on, the players' games has just been immense. So, it's the biggest part for us. It's most of our blueprint to success, to winning those world championships, because we all know when you get down to, say, the medal scenarios and stuff like that, there's a lot of info overload that goes through your head. Winning, losing, what people are going to think of me if I win or lose, all this stuff while you're trying to play. And it's just being able to manage all your thoughts and just keeping in the present.
Perfect. I think the key thing there you both touched on, it doesn't matter if it's a club player or an international player, it's the same challenges we all have in this space. And you want your club player to be able to manage this as much as you want your international player to be able to manage. And I think a couple of things you both said there was around keeping it simple. And one of the things, Shan, you said to me on, was it Thursday, around, coaches make it really complicated sometimes. And I think that's one of the takeaways here. And I'll just chuck it back to you in a second, Shan. But, as coaches, when we talk about the mental game, it's often around how we simplify some of that technical stuff. Because, Shan, your experience of coaches give you too much. What happens?
Well, it's just, as I said, it's a massive information overload. So what happens is your sense of clarity just goes out the window. You got all this info, options, what you should be doing, what you can be doing to try and get to the finish line the quickest and the best sort of case scenario. But when there's too much info just thrown out, all of that kind of stuff can get in the road of you actually doing well. So for me, it's the coaches that say what they have to say at the right times, but just short, sharp messages. It's so much easier for myself just to process that as well, and then just refocus on what I'm doing. So less is better for me. But as you said earlier, some people might be different. Some people might like more. It depends on the individual. But all that kind of stuff needs to be said to your coaches prior to.
Perfect. Great. PB, do you want to add anything to that one around the coaches and information? Is he on mute? Okay. We'll come back to that if he comes off. But again, I think what I'm hoping you understand, mental skills isn't just around teaching mental skills. It's actually a culture. It's not just something you put to one side. It's actually how the coaches interact with information and we give. And as they both said there, we know if we get an information overload for most of us, it's very hard to focus. So when some of the questions you guys talked around and we're touching here is, how do I get in flow more often, and why are goal setting important? So I'm going to touch on that in a second, then I'll chuck it to Joe and Shannon around what their take on flow is and goals. But I suppose the key thing around flow, it's something we can actually create. So flow doesn't just happen, and there's 8 parts to flow. And the beauty of it, there's 4 of them that as coaches, you guys have got a bit of control over, as you have for your athletes. And the first part is, when you're creating environments for your athletes that they actually have to focus, which sounds so obvious. But often we don't train the focus. So there's lots of distractions, and maybe we're talking. So getting your athletes to actually understand they have to focus on something, and we'll come to that in a second, what that could look like. But clarity of goals and giving feedback. And when we talk about feedback, it might be their feedback. And the beauty of technology now is that if you're working on a technique with your bowler, you can just record it and then show it to them, and they have to get the feedback around it. And that's the beauty of technology now. They can get that instant feedback about what they're seeing and what they're feeling. And that's where, as coaches, you don't have to tell them all the time. You can just be asking. But again, the key part to that when we talk about coaching is having clarity of goals. And it's been interesting the last 4 or 5 weeks talking to lots of different athletes, is that we often have stripped this really back now, because the goal setting now becomes really important. It's not just goals for winning games or tournaments. It's actually goals for each time you train. So making sure you've got that clarity of goals, giving them the feedback or asking for their feedback becomes really, really important. And then often there's a balance between the challenge and the skills. And this is a bit around understanding when you're setting your training up, that you're training the skill, then you're training into a game scenario, and then you're training under pressure. But most athletes like to be pushed. So really kind of think about what is your training going to look like, and what sort of level of skill and challenge will you give them? Because if we look at it, the last couple there's often a feeling of control over the task, and that's the bit around negotiating around what you need to be doing and not need to be doing around it. Because if we create a challenge which is too high, that's what creates our anxiety. If you create challenges which are too low, that creates our boredom. Because the other part to it, what most of us like, is that intrinsic ability to perform. And what they feel that when we talk about intrinsic, it's actually about accomplishing the task. So it's not about necessarily winning or making teams. It's actually about the ability to get better. We actually quite like that ability to get better. So when you think about your training, flow is something we actually can create, and you can create it through how you set your trainings up, making sure there's situations where, again, they have ability to focus, there's clarity of those goals, balance between the challenge and the skills. We're not, all your players are of different levels basically around it. And again, there's a bit of buy-in from them about what they want to achieve at that training. So flow can be made. But as a question for Joe and Shan, how often do you guys reckon you get into flow when you're playing bowls?
You want me to go first, or Joe?
Yeah, you go, Shan.
When you apply it to all areas of your game, not just in training, when you're playing, I think one of the few things, things that a lot of people struggle with is the boredom side. And we sort of, I don't think we do that serious enough. Like sometimes as players, like when we're actually practicing, like just drawing and as you touched on this before, Quinny, when you just drawing shots and stuff, it feels easy. Hence, because there's no pressure, it's repetitive, so we get bored with it. We get more excited when we're trying to do things that are a little bit more difficult. Now, the reason why you don't get bored in it in a game is because there's pressure. If there might be playing for centre events, world titles, club events, whatever, but there's a element of pressure on it which makes you a bit more focused. But those are the things for me that help me the most is practicing the boring stuff, because you got to get used to it. And it's just one of those, it's a good way to practice a lot of your mental skills as well around keeping in the present, focusing and stuff, because it's easy for your mind to wander when something's relatively easy to do.
Perfect. Thank you. Joe?
It is, yeah, like you say, it is a repetitive sport. It's they're doing the same thing the first bowl of the tournament as the last bowl of the tournament. So like Shannon said, it's getting into that, being uncomfortable, being comfortable, being a little bit uncomfortable in your practice, and repetition is a huge thing. If you train it enough, you can see it when you play a game. It's a draw into an off-centre jack, so that when you're you're faced with it in a game, it isn't a bad thing. It's like, righto, I've done this in practice. Get on the mat, go through your pre-shot routine, what's your process in drawing a shot, and just do it. So, and if you haven't done that in your practice, that you become a little bit anxious in a game, not knowing, the differences in a green, on an unplayed green, part of the green kind of thing. So it's the repetition, it's the preparation. I think to be in flow all comes back to your preparation. If you prepare well, it brings confidence to your game, it brings confidence to yourself. I always like going, when I get on a plane to go somewhere to a tournament, I like thinking to myself, I've prepared well. Whether I go good or bad, it's not because of my preparation. I'd hate to be in a case where, you play in a tournament, you go poorly and you think to yourself, yeah, I could have done more, or my prep wasn't that good and all that. So I think it goes hand in hand, the preparation with the flow of a game, and that's just huge. Don't sell yourself short. There's just certainly no shortcuts.
Perfect. And look, we'll touch on that preparation in a minute. But look, I think the key thing for flow, the person who asked the question, is you don't need to be in it to perform well. If you try and make yourself get into flow, often we don't. But it comes back to what Joe touched on, is creating some preparations and some routines around the ability to get into flow. And the reality of that is often it's, shall I go back to that one? It's going back to the basics. And this is kind of a bit of a flow diagram. It comes back, when you're coaching, think about the skill set you're setting them and compared to the challenge. And it's about trying to find that middle ground where, yes, there's always a point, as they both players touched on, where there's a repetition part around it. But it's almost the ability for the say to them, well, what's more boring, doing repetition or losing? Because my experience, the top athletes do the basics better and for longer. They don't do the complicated stuff around it. So when we talk about flow, we get into flow two places the most, and that's often at work. We get into a flow state, and we can get into flow through gaming. And gaming kind of hacks flow very well, the video games, because what they do at the start is they set a challenge which is very low because your skill's very low. But as your skill moves up, what games does really well, video games, is they put the challenge up. So consistently you keep moving with it, but they don't put the challenge up massively. They just put it up a little bit so you can get it. And so think about it in your coaching space, is when you're setting your players challenges, it's just there so they can kind of just about get that each time. You just keep adjusting it. And often that creates that flow state because they get in situations where they are actually achieving. If you make the challenge too high, then that's when we can tend to give up or lose a bit of interest or certainly not be in flow. So the key thing around flow for athletes is often they're in there once or twice a year. It's not a place they're in a lot all the time. When you are in there, it's a great place to be. But as Joe said, if we understand what our preparation looks like, which we'll touch on, we've got more chance of getting closer to flow than if we haven't. PB, you're there. Anything you want to add to that, Pete?
No, hopefully you can hear me now. I was on mute. Yeah, look, you've got to trust yourself. Mention of preparation and things like that. If you do your preparation well, then obviously you give yourself the best chance of being successful. But even if your preparation is not great, there's nothing, sometimes you have no control over that. It's very much about trusting yourself. Everyone's played lots of bowls with whatever level you play at, but just go out and trust yourself. Effort is one of the terms that often gets used, to try or not to try. How often we hear, the harder I try, the worse I get. Well, that is the outcome if you're actually trying too hard. So it's being able to try and get in that phase within your mind that you just go out and bowl.
Perfect. And I think the key thing around this mental space, and we've got, 3 players there who are world champions and world class, it's still really hard. And that's the bit around, encouraging our players around it. Even when we get this right, it's still hard. And I suppose I use mental skills as like fitness, because even when you get fit, you've actually still got to then train your fitness to maintain it, but it's still hard. And that's the key thing around this. And I think some athletes think if it's hard because their brain is racing everywhere or they're finding it hard to focus, that they're not mentally tough or mentally smart. But even when we get this right, it's still a challenge. And I think it's an important message for our bowlers, is that when you're learning something new or there's a situation that's a bit of a threat or pressure, it's still going to be hard at times. Sometimes we get it really right because we get into that flow state, but sometimes we won't. So that's where, your messages as coaches become really, really important, because whatever you're telling them becomes their internal dialogue around things. So when we look at it, goals are important, flow is important, but it kind of goes into this bit here. How does one grab focus from the get-go? And is there any way to overcome negative thoughts? And I think Joe's kind of touched on that. How do we grab focus from the get-go? It comes back to that preparation. The brain loves routines around it. And, we've played in the blackjacks, around what does a warm-up look like? And we've almost changed that word to preparation, because warm-up, if I'm going to say a football or a netball one, is literally you're running around, you're warming up. Where bowls, it's probably slightly different. So one of the challenges for you as coaches or still as players is, what does your preparation look like before? If you're starting at 11 o'clock, what do you need to do the morning of that game to get yourself actually not just physically ready, but mentally ready to move forward? So again, if I chuck it to any one of you 3 around, how do you ensure that you are ready to go from word go? What are some kind of key things you've learned over the years to get yourself ready? Any one of you, Joe, Shan, or Pete?
Yeah, look, I think it's like your pre-shot routine. It's a pre-game routine in a different way. It's knowing, how much sleep you need, how, what to eat, your hydration levels. It's all it's a learning curve on what you need. And sometimes you're going to do things that don't work. And other times you're going to do things where you think, right, I'm locking that in. And it's just about, I think, over time, learning about yourself, and I sure still am learning about myself, what I need, what works well for me. But and that's not the same for everyone. And I think one thing I want to say is, like, if you're in a team event, because one person might be off doing something by themselves, doesn't mean that they're not part of the team. It's just they're doing what they need for themselves to be prepared, to be able to switch on from the get-go. So, I'm a big one. I've had a pre-game routine for a number of years now, and it hasn't really changed a lot. Some people laugh at me, but hey, I don't really care. But it's a personal thing, and it's certainly what works for you. But it's getting it right in the mind, and if you have to write that down at the start, do it, because if it's written down, it seems more important, I think. But it's just, having a go, seeing if it works. If it doesn't, scrap it, move on to the next thing.
Joe, can I ask you, often you go away with a tennis ball for sort of 10 minutes or 10 minutes before the game, 15 minutes. How does that help you? What's that for you, do you think?
For mine, I've come from a sporting background on quite physical sports, your soccer and rugby and touch and softball and volleyball and everything else. And so a warm-up's always been part of sport. And for me, like with bowls, it's, you don't have to be puffing when you get out onto the green. But it's the tennis ball for me. It's a number of things. It's a start of the process of my pre-game routine. It's hand-eye coordination. I'm walking, I'm jogging, I'm throwing, and stretching as well. So it's all part of it, and it takes probably a quarter of an hour before a game, and I can come back, and it's like I've ticked that, I'm ready to go. Let's get it done.
Perfect. Brilliant. Thanks. Good one. Shan, for you?
Yeah. So for me, I suppose Joe touched on it a fair bit. It's a bit of you just got to try a few different things and what works for the individual. But at the same time, and it's something that I admire about Joe is the consistency around it. Like when you do find something, keep doing it. I think a lot of people, they, in the Blackjacks, it's been pretty good over quite a few years now, but it's not many people will continue that when they go back to, say, a lower level of play, whether it be club level or centre level. It seems to be when some come into camp, they'll do it then. So it's just finding what works for you and being consistent with it. And it's something that, us as players, we always see Jo go on her walks and stuff with the tennis ball. So she's really deliberate in her pre-game, which is incredible, and obviously it helps her. For me, it's just music. I'm a bit of my pre-game sort of routines probably start the night before. That's where I get the most benefit of how I'm going to play a player, what they like, what style of play they like playing, and how I'm going to play the game when I wake up in the morning. And when I do have a nice haircut, I like to do my hair. and those kind of things. But I suppose half an hour before the match, it's generally music, and it's just trying to relax. All my thought around how I'm going to play the game's already been done, so I've already got clarity around that. And I'm not the fastest starter in games. I'm usually a kind of player that sometimes can take me a while to get the ball going, and it's something that I'm still working on. But it's not because I'm not. And some people might go, "Oh, he's not quite ready" or whatever. It's just that sometimes you're not feeling the green at that particular time. I'm figuring out, what shots can I play with what kind of weight, that kind of stuff. So pretty much for me, my routines are slightly different to Joe's, and I'm a bit of a music nut, if you could say, and that seems to work for me.
Music and hair gel, perfect.
Hair gel, mate, yeah.
So PB, you're obviously not using hair gel anymore. So for you, what are your thoughts around preparation?
Look, it's the key. Look, the mental side of the game, I think, is the difference between being a good player and becoming a great player. And I looked upon this a long time ago, what I needed to do, because there was lots of very good players, just as good as me. Some were better than me. And what did I need to be able to turn that around? And that's when I started playing around with goal setting and setting goals and affirmations and visualizations and meditation and those types of things. Not that I'm putting in a plug in, but the book called Think and Play Better Bowls or Perfect Bowls with Wally and Rupert is something that I think everyone can get something from. Because it actually shows you how you can try and get rid of your negative thoughts and get the focus going. And one of the key things I think Shannon mentioned there is that often we only do it for short periods of time and then forget about it, or don't do it, or don't think it's the important thing. And so I think that's a key, that you've got to train yourself to do it on a regular basis. And regular can be anything you want that to be. But at times we learn things and put them aside and move on to something else. But there's no doubt if you can get rid of the negative thoughts. I'll just give you an example. When it was windy, I always used to say to myself, I'm the worst player in New Zealand when it's windy. And I proved that to be correct 100% of the time. And I turned it around, and one day I was playing actually at Hokiwhitu in Manawatu, not that it blows much there, and I just said to myself, I'm the best player in New Zealand when it becomes windy. And from that moment on, wasn't always successful, but I gave myself the best possible chance of being successful. When it started to blow, I wanted it to blow harder because I knew it was going to make it harder for the opposition.
Perfect. And there's some good summaries there and some probably little bits of gold that they've all said to you, because it's all slightly different how they do it, but it goes back to why setting goals become important, because it gives that bit of that focus. And my experience is I haven't met any players who are good enough to sit there in any sport 30 seconds before a game and then go out and play without doing some form of preparation. So as a coach, think about what that could look like for your players, ask them questions around it. And as they've all said, they've got to look to be consistent with that. I remember one of the Black Caps a few years ago, that they had a really cool and clarity their preparation in the game. They then got selected in the Black Caps, and often in the cricket scenario, there'd be two before they have a test match before training. There'd be two vans, the early van or late van, and because they didn't trust their preparation, they looked at who went in which van. If it was all the big boys went in the early van, they went in the early van, which is not what they'd normally do. Next, when they get down to the training earlier, they're walking around not knowing what to do, and that's when the negative thoughts started coming in because they started overthinking things. So the key thing is, working with your players to work out a simple process and then trust them to stick through it all the way through. Because it kind of leads into that negative thoughts one. Is there any way to overcome negative thoughts? Yeah, there is, but we can't get rid of them. I mean, they're normal. And if we had time and went through all these three players, I mean, they'd all talk about situations that PB just touched on it around our negative thoughts around it. So one of the key things is getting them almost to be able to understand negative thoughts are normal. It's more about how they can manage those thoughts. And so when you hear the language around when they turn up at a certain green and, I never play well at this green, or this green's always really tough, or this end's always really hard, as PB said, all you're doing is sowing a seed into your own head around how it's going to go. And it's not about walking around and telling everyone you're the best in the world or you're the best on windy conditions, but internally it is around that. And if you got a chance, there's a guy called Trevor Womard, Moawad, and he has a really interesting interview on impact theory around self-talk. And he talks about stop saying stupid shit out loud, which is quite a nice way to think about it, because often we do. We talk about, I never play well here, or it's always tough here, this person always beats me. And all it does, it reinforces that negative talk into your own head around it. So as a coach or as a player, it's a really good one to start working with your players about what sort of thoughts do they actually need as they actually start preparing them. Because if you're actually being negative towards yourself, it's very hard to flick that switch then to be positive. So again, if I chuck it back to you three, when you find yourself with negative thoughts, what's some processes you've found helpful, whether it's a bit of self-doubt or getting outcome focused? What do you guys kind of do to kind of manage that? Because it's all very normal, isn't it?
Yep, absolutely, Connie. It's for me, obviously, it used to happen quite a bit when I was probably early 20s. And I didn't really know how to deal with it as such. It created anxiety. Sometimes you didn't even want to be there. Got to the point where I wanted to play with glasses on because I didn't want to make eye contact with people because it was because I'm thinking, they're going to be judging me on how I'm playing. And it's just one of those things you got to go through it and face it and go through those paces and put yourself through to try and learn. But I mean, a lot of people do now is just do little things or triggers to reset yourself, whether it be remove yourself from the situation, go to the toilet, refocus, a little bit of self-talk, and that sort of and that time frame you have away from the green, come back, and then refocus on the small things. Just focus on maybe getting your weight right or getting your line right, and just simplify your whole game plan. But yeah, it's negative thoughts will never go away. There's always going to be some thought of doubt, whether you're playing good or bad, because the higher the level you get to, the result at the end is obviously a lot higher. So whether it be world championships, it's a lot of things going through your brain, whether you're playing good or bad. But when you are not playing that well, it's just the ability not to judge or let people think about people judging you, and just who gives a F what other people think, and just do what you have to do to keep yourself sort of calm and relaxed.
Perfect. Thanks for that. That's good summary. Joe, you any thoughts, or PB?
Yeah, obviously what Shannon's saying is totally correct, and I think, like you said, John, these thoughts go through your mind, and I think it's not a bad thing. It's how you cope with the thoughts going through your mind. You can't stop them, and if the minute you try and don't think that, it becomes an internal battle with yourself. So I think it's for me, it's going right back to basics. I had a mare of a Trans-Tasman recently. Lost the first 3, maybe 4 games, and I just found that I was just trying too hard. I was just, I so wanted to win for our team and our country and everything. I was just trying so hard, and in the end, I just thought to myself, "This is just stupid." It's supposed to be fun, and my whole thought process was, let's just try and get the bowl to come out as beautifully out of my hand as I can. And all of a sudden, everything went away, other than going through my process, doing my pre-shot routine, and it was all about right here, right now. This bowl, not the next bowl or the next end or the next game. It was just this bowl here. Let's try and get it out of my hand as nicely as it can. And it got me right back into the basics. It kind of stopped. I stopped thinking, and I just was doing it all by feel. And lucky enough, a couple of games went my way in the rest of the Trans-Tasman and that. But it's about the not overthinking it. It's keeping the head on the mat and not thinking about the result up the other end, I think. But just going through those thoughts, going through your mind, that you kind of acknowledge them. You acknowledge that they've come in, and then you kind of self-talk about how they're going to leave your head rather than stay in there or come out completely horrible. And so it's about learning all about how that happens with the thoughts going in your head, I think.
So just on that, and PB, you might want to add to this too, and I'll chuck it back to Shannon and Joe in a second in case we don't get to it. So often what will help with that is your pre-shot routine, around the ability to kind of have all those thoughts, because the key thing to understand for all of us, we have a thing called a negative bias, and we're born with it. It's our survival mechanism around it. So if you think about, if you're in the middle of a game of bowls, for the brain that's quite vulnerable, because as Shannon said, because you do worry about what people think, we all do. We all worry about letting people down, whatever it is. So when the brain starts thinking that way, which is all very normal and natural, that's when the kind of fight, flight, freeze part kicks into us around it. And that's where we talk about necessarily not performing that well, it's often when we're into that kind of freeze mentality or flight, we want to get out of there. So often what we talk to the players around is their pre-shot routine. And part of their pre-shot routine has been able to move from kind of, it's almost a bit of a V analogy, from a kind of a really wide focus or lots of thoughts down to maybe one or two key things. When you're on the mat, you've got a clarity of focus around it. So PB, if I chuck it to you first around coaching or teaching a pre-shot routine or a bit that you used, and maybe we can go back to Shan and Joe about what they do on the mat to bring themselves back into that moment.
Yeah, look, it's very much playing in the now, and it's something that I think that we've obviously Joe touched on just a moment ago, and the pre-bowl routine. Those are the things that set off the train of thoughts. That basically what you want to do with the bowl you're going to play, the shot you're going to be playing. And all those things are something that you've done hundreds, thousands of times before. And it's trying to ensure that you get back to that, because as Joe mentioned, you start thinking about letting your teammates down, what other people are going to say about you, am I good enough to be here, those types of things. And while those thoughts are all going to come in at some stage, you've just got to switch those off. And, I used an anchoring thing, and it was very much about my bowls cloth in my hand. When I started to give it a really hard squeeze, it seemed to be the trigger point to get back into the now. And so consequently, yes, back in the now, this is what I've got to do. I've done this thousands of times. It's no shot or run a bowl out or whatever it may be. So those are the things that I trained my mind to think about. Now, if it was easy, then everyone would be doing it and everyone would be playing perfect bowls. But unless you actually practice it and train it and think about it, when the moment comes on the green to play, then it's not going to just come from somewhere unless you've actually done some work in that area. But the biggest thing for me was always playing in the now.
And so the key thing as coaches is making sure that when they're playing, they're not just picking the bowl up and chucking it down. They're stopping and they're pausing and they're following a pre-shot routine around it. So for you, Joe, when does your pre-shot routine kind of start? Or what stage do you kind of start yours?
Yeah, look, I've got a few little trigger points. I don't pick up my bowl till very late. I can't concentrate for long periods of time.
Yeah.
So like between bowls, I can be talking to my coach or, having a look at something down the road or whatever. And that's part of my pre-shot routine. I kick the bowl up just behind the mat. So it's kind of the starting point, but until I pick the bowl up, that's like my switch. That's you've almost got 12 seconds of concentration. Let's make it worthwhile. And then I go through my, what I do on the mat. I've already got my shot sorted before I pick up my bowl. Got that sorted just before I pick up my bowl, and then, set myself up and go through that kind of routine. But, I feel that, if I pick my bowl up too soon, I do then just jump on the mat and let it go. So I've been really quite anal with the whole, I do not pick up my bowl until, their bowl's stopped. I've just worked out my shot and I'm ready to go now. So, yeah, I found it's helped really well, the delay in picking up the bowl. Things can annoy you, things can get to you, but you've got it all worked out before you pick that bowl up. And it's only a 10, 12 second concentration span then.
And that really leads into, you talk about the flow state. Often when we're in flow is that we're going at the speed we need to, but often when we get out of flow and we get worried, we tend to speed things up. Because again, the brain's saying, right, let's get out of here as quickly as we can. So again, as a coach or a player, it's around getting the players to, and you both touched on this, to be consistent with it at the same pace. And being aware when you do start speeding things up, because generally when we start speeding things up, we get ourselves in a bit of trouble with the outcome around it. So Shan, are you reasonably similar, or when would you start yours?
Yeah. Obviously, before any shots played, or before I even hop on the mat, I've got a sense of clarity of what I want to try and achieve with the bowl in hand. And then so when it doesn't matter when I pick it up. I could pick it up sometimes, I just sit it on my hip. Sometimes I might scoop it up with my foot. it just takes my focus away from trying to concentrate on every bowl that gets delivered and watching everything, because if you did that, you're just going to be absolutely knackered by the end of the game.
Yeah.
But I do take a conscious note of, especially if the green is, if you get to a surface that is playing a few tricks or there's tracks in it, I like to just have a little look at what the opposition bowls are doing, where the areas of the green that might not be as kind to you, and just make a little mental note of those things. But I'm quite a, once I get on the mats and before I deliver, I'm quite a tempo kind of player. So you'll probably find that it takes the same amount of seconds from when I stand on the mat to when I deliver it. It's exactly the same. But I do change it up on purpose depending on who I'm playing. If I'm playing a fast player, but I'm aware of that, and it doesn't really affect me as it could do with others. For example, I know that if you play fast players and if you were to slow them down, it does affect their tempo and how they like to play the game. So it can have actually a massive positive effect for my game and for me sort of beating them in that mental space. But it's not easy because you're going away from what you know that makes when you play well at your own tempo. So you got to practice it, and you got to go through, okay, I'm going to deliberately play slower against guys like Ryan Bester, Aaron Wilson, these kind of guys, just to throw them off. But you got to be willing to, go through that grind. And it's something that I've had to learn over the years, and it's and that's all comes back to, that's part of my my pre-game routine, is knowing who I'm playing and what skills they offer to get the best outcome. So yeah, all in all, it's definitely, for me, it's a tempo and how I like to approach depending on who I'm playing.
Perfect. So for the three of you, I mean, what would you focus on? You're on the mat, you've done your pre-shot routine, and you're ready to go. Is there differences in what you guys actually focus on? In the sense, is it a spot in the green? Is it a feeling you have? Is it something at the end of the green? What would you encourage players to be focused on, or is there anything that works for you guys?
For me, oh, sorry, you go, Joe.
No, you go.
So for me, generally, all the focusing on the outcomes or what you're trying to achieve is done before I hop on the mat and play the bowl. So once I'm on there and about to bowl, everything's pretty clear. You already know what you're going to do. So you just got to make sure that, for me personally, is that you're lined up in the right direction. Make sure you're not dropping your shoulders through delivery, all those kind of things, and just hit your core skills. So your line, just nail your line. You'll know what the weight feels like because you might have been playing for half an hour. I don't know. You might have only been playing for 10 minutes, but all that stuff comes back to you in your computer. If you've put in your hard yards, you'll know what it's like playing on a 16-second green, 18-second green, 12-second green. So it becomes it's already set. So yeah, it's just the core skills, the refining, and just going, okay, the line's there, hit your line, and then make your adjustments. Obviously, when the bowl comes to rest, if you're a touch short, just throw it a bit harder. If you're too long, you throw it a bit shorter. Those kind of things. If you're too wide, just throw it a bit narrow. People like that.
Joe, for you, what would you focus on before you bowl?
A simple game, isn't it, Shannon? Look, I was lucky enough to, I suppose, in my very, very first year, way back in, quite a few years ago, I had a training session with the then New Zealand coach, John Murtagh, and he taught me a way of taking my line. And to me, it made sense. Coming from cricket, softball, you look at what you aim at, you step at what you aim at, and you throw to where you're aiming at. So that really resonated with me. Obviously, taking line is so personal. I mean, it doesn't matter if you look up in the sky. If you're getting your bowl back to the centre line consistently, that's sweet. But I'm a very look at a spot on the bank, to the point of it might be a flower. It might be, sometimes it's a scoreboard that gets removed, which isn't a good idea. But it's really, really important to, whatever you do, it's just a consistency. It's like, it's that whole process, that whole teaching yourself that you're doing it every single time. It's not you do it this bowl but not next bowl. And so I approach the mat pretty much so that if I walk straight on the mat, I can walk straight off it in the direction I'm playing it. My shoulders, head, hips, all square to where I'm going. And then your step out is just obviously to the direction you're wanting to bowl, and everything goes from there. Your head goes, your arm goes, and everything. So I am a very stickler for, there's a spot on the bank. And obviously, like Shannon said, if consistently that spot on the bank is you're finishing wide of your target, you obviously make that minor adjustment and find a spot on the bank that you can work off. But the weight thing is the hard thing. You can't teach anyone that. But again, if you're good with your pre-shot routine, your delivery sound, the feeling that you get from all that confidence of the preparation, you can make the adjustment. And it's just a matter of, like Shannon said, it's not, you don't go to the front of the mat if you're constantly short, or go to the back of the mat if you're longer. You're constantly short, just throw it a bit quicker. Bowl it a bit harder. It's not rocket science, but and that's it. It's keeping it simple. It's not, oh geez, I'm too wide. It's just, righto, that's not the line. There's my line, and just make it simple. But again, it's you've got to practice it. Whatever you do, you just got to. It's a repetition game.
Perfect. Pete, your thoughts? Good summary. Thanks, Joe.
It's not to make judgments on yourself. It's a simple game. Just observe what's happening and make the corrections. There's only two things you got to get right. That's line and pace. Only four things can go wrong: too wide, too narrow, too heavy, too short. That's the basis of the game. We're focusing, I suppose everyone starts off, and there's no right or wrong in this area of the bank, the numbers, the pegs, the scoreboards. I think we all started that way. I certainly did. Then at times you notice marks on the green that the bowl seems to be going over all the time, you're fishing on the centre line. But any permanent mark is dependent on the mat being in the same place each time. Because once the mat gets shifted around, those marks have to be readjusted. And for me, I found that just the visualization of the line that the ball wanted to take, and I took it from the head back to the mat. I just had a vision from there and saying that's the line. And often the line, I often went to using railway tracks. This is the channel that I need the ball to be in to get into that area. And so consequently, when I found that I concentrated on one particular spot, I found that pace control became a little more difficult. So I needed a more overall vision of what was going on. I needed to be looking up the green further. And that became just a natural head position. So the head was never down or up. It was just a natural head position. Because often what happens if you're looking down or looking up, your actual muscles in the back of your neck start to get tired towards the end of the day. And so you've got to be, and shoulders and things like that, they've got to be nice and loose. But none of these things are right or wrong. It's what you find is best for you. And I encourage all the coaches when they're with players is to give them those options. What I do won't necessarily work for anyone else. And you have a prime example. Joe goes for marks on banks, and that's great. She's one of the greatest players that's ever played the game. For me personally, I visualize, so you can be anywhere between those things. Not everyone can visualize the line, and these days it's a little easier. In fact, when we play with centre lines, is you can visualize the angle off the centre line, irrespective of where the mat is. That angle remains basically the same. So those are things that you try and you find out, yes, I'm happy with that. No, that just doesn't quite work for me. But I encourage you when you're coaching players to give them the opportunity to try as many different things in regards to this until they come up with the answer, rather than us telling them this is the way you do it.
Perfect. Look, I'm just conscious of time, and we want to bring Bruce in for a second. So I'll just summarise a couple of things I've all said there. And one of the, Pete's talked about visualisation. It's a great tool as a coach or as a player to use. And when we talk about that, it's just the ability for them to imagine the shot in their head. And again, this is where technology can be quite helpful. If you record them, if you're trying to do a technical thing with them, you can record them. You get them to watch it on the screen, whether it's a phone or iPad, and just get them to close their eyes and just imagine themselves doing it. It's a great way of kind of layering the ability to learn. And look, the other one was a question later on. We only probably got through 4 questions. I think it was 12. But the breathing work becomes important, and Pete touched earlier on that meditation side of it. But one thing, a part of the pre-shot routine is making sure that they're breathing and they're calm before they actually hop on the mat. So, you know, as a coach, just remind them to stop and pause becomes really, really important. So when they're on the mat, they are calm and they'll tend to make better decisions around that. But look, you three, thank you very much for your time this morning. I think you've just shared some really good insight into what makes a world-class player and why you guys are world-class players around it. But as I'm hoping all the coaches are saying, that there's many ways to do this, but there is some key kind of ones around it. You know, they've all set clarity of goals, whether it's training goals, tournament goals, what they're doing. So really encourage your players to do that. Understand focus doesn't just happen. They've all talked around their preparation and how they prepare, so they can actually kind of narrow that focus down to that one thing. And the negative thoughts, again, the breathing work, the pre-shot routine, the imagery, all that kind of stuff allows us to manage those negative thoughts, because they're always going to be there. Sorry, there's not an athlete I've worked with or a person I work with that doesn't experience some form of negative thoughts or self-doubt. But my experience, and they've all touched on this, is the best ones just accept that's okay and have a process to manage that. So look, all three of you, thank you for that insight. That was awesome. And Graham, we've got one more. What's now? We've got.
Yeah, just before we move on to Bruce Quinny, just a couple of things that I've written down here, and I think the first thing that's come to my mind is the pieces of gold that have just been shared, and you know, we've mentioned preparation, process, consistency from Joe, and you can't underestimate all of those 3 items. Shannon, the dark glasses, mate. I think everyone should wear dark glasses on the green going forward. And PB, we should all squeeze our cloth as well. So I think you've all given us some pieces of gold. And you know, I also reflect and think there's not many or any countries around the world that would have listened to 2 world champions this morning, or 3 in fact with PB as well, and had all these wee gems thrown at them. So a big thank you from me as well, guys. It's been huge. So, and thank you, Connie, for driving that. So PB, we might just move on to Bruce Wakefield. The last piece of the jigsaw in this first presentation is disabled bowls, and Bruce has kindly joined us, and PB, fire ahead. You're up, PB.
Morning, Peter.
Hi, Bruce. See, we've both got the same haircut today.
Oh, yeah, that was on the pre-shot routines.
Yeah, look, Bruce, perhaps you could tell us how you go about it in regards to that.
Actually, I must admit, my pre-shot routine has improved out of sight in the last 3 or 4 years since some of the coaching sessions leading up to the Commonwealth Games, and for some of the Burnside stuff and coaching. Graham Rees runs a training session, or we used to have it on a Friday night, and when you get into training sessions against the likes of Taylor Bruce and Andrew Kelly, Gary Watts, Gary Lawson, and those guys, you just watch and learn. But for a disabled bowler, the key thing is to get organised, get in your preset routines, work out your balance and your positions before you even step on the mat, of where exactly you're going to line up. Listening to Jo, she points to a mark on the bank, whatever. I do that, but I can't actually hold my head up when I deliver a bowl. I'm looking about 6 to 9 feet in front of me at a mark on the green, regardless of where the mat is. And I go from the bank and bring it back towards me, and it seems to work. And people have said to me, how can you get the right green all the time? I said, well, that's what works for me. So everyone is different. It's what you're comfortable with and what you can do repeatedly and consistently. Some of the coaching techniques and the routines of Sharon and yourself and Richard Girvin and the Commonwealth Games and Trans-Tasman series, they were just so enlightening and helpful to get that consistency factor. yeah, it all comes back to what you can do and what it's not what you can't do, it's what you can do. And for me personally, I stand with quite a wide stance. If I'm standing sort of square onto the kitty, my feet are sort of like about 10 to 8, I suppose. I have my feet about probably 18 inches apart from front to back, but also about 18 inches apart sideways to give better balance for a consistent delivery platform, which helps immensely.
I suppose for coaches working with the para athletes, the balance is the key, isn't it?
That's the most important thing of all. Like, since I've sort of been pushed into prominence from Bowls New Zealand and playing in the Commonwealth Games and the Bowls 3-5, there are a number of disabled bowlers that have asked me for help on getting more consistent has improved markedly. And like some of the informal coaching sessions I've done with different bowlers, they've come back a couple of weeks later and said, holy hell, that just makes it so much easier what you've described us to do. And it's all about eliminating as much movement as possible in a delivery stride. Like, for a disabled bowler to try and start their delivery stride with their feet together, I would say impossible. You're never going to get any consistency because you're basically going to be falling off the mat. Whereas when you've got your feet further apart, you've got less step to take, you've got less body movement, so you've got to get a lot more consistency.
Yeah, look, we're getting close to time, Bruce, but you've got a nice smile on your face. I have to say that the highlight for me at the Commonwealth Games in 2018 was your smile and the way that you were engaged with the whole process of being at an international event like that. And I know Joe mentioned it about enjoying the game. That's what we play the game for. And you certainly do that. And it was one of the highlights for me personally. I know for a lot of other people how you embrace that.
Yeah, I suppose that's me. I've always had a nickname of Smiley somewhere along life, from different, whether it's work or bowls or whatever. You've just got to embrace every opportunity you got, and that's certainly what we did at the Commonwealth Games, even though we got nutted right on the end. You know, the only thing that we missed out on was the wrong national anthem at the finish and the wrong flag on the top. But we've played every game possible, and we played to our best abilities, and we just had a lot of fun. You know, with Mark and Barry, just such an awesome trio, and for the people in the crowd, we were playing for them as much as us.
That's wonderful.
Thanks very much, guys. And yeah, I think for me, the main takeaway as coaches when we're coaching somebody with a disability, the key message, and Bruce got it across there, is what people with a disability can do. It's not what they can't do. And I always recall, Bruce, I had an elderly chap who couldn't retain his balance in a coaching session, and you came along and coached him. And that will hold in my memory for a long time, because as coaches, we're always trying to share our knowledge so we get the best out of people, and you did that night, and it was fantastic. And so thank you from me as well for your contributions to the coaching side of things. So we'll wrap the first session up then, and again, thank you to all the presenters. I'll shut this meeting down. If we can just have a 5-minute break, apart from the presenters, if the presenters of the next session, Gail and Sharon, you can jump into the next meeting. I'll set it up now. And everyone else, if you can just take a break for 5 minutes, go and have a drink, whatever, and then we'll jump back into Gail and Sharon's presentation. Thanks, everyone.